Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're putting on our surgical masks and performing a rigorous legal autopsy.
Mm.
We aren't just talking about abstract concepts or, floating theories. We are dissecting a specific, messy, and I think highly instructional contract dispute under the Uniform Commercial Code.
It's a fascinating case. It really is.
Heh.
Because it forces us to look at the anatomy of a deal from the moment words are spoken to the second the ink dries.
And what happens when the market turns against you?
Especially then.
Exactly. We're looking at the case file of Doty Farms v. Harvest Distributors. So let's lay out the facts for everyone listening. We have Doty Farms, a family-owned organic operation run by Mariana.
Right.
And on the other side, Harvest Distributors, a regional player represented by Leonidas.
Classic setup, a producer and a distributor.
Right. So in February they meet. Mariana tells Leonidas, and this is quote, "We can supply all the organic kale you'll need this year at $1.50 per pound." Leonidas responds, quote, "That sounds great. We'll take as much kale as you can deliver."
And that's crucial language right there. All you need versus as much as you can deliver. That distinction really matters.
We will definitely get to that. So Mariana smiles, says perfect, and promises to send over a written agreement. A few days later, Doty emails a short contract. It says, Doty agrees to sell, and Harvest agrees to buy Doty's entire output of organic kale for the 2025 season at $1.50 per pound.
Okay.
And here's the kicker. It contains a merger clause. It states, "This written agreement constitutes the entire agreement between the parties."
And that clause, that is going to be the smoking gun in our analysis later. It essentially builds a wall around the written document.
Absolutely. So Harvest signs it, but then in March, reality hits.
Yeah.
Kale prices just skyrocket.
Of course.
Doty contacts Harvest and says, "Look, we have unexpected costs. We need $2 per pound." Harvest says, "No way, we have a contract for $1.50.
And Mariana fires back.
She does. She argues, but Leonidas said at the meeting the price might go up if costs rose. Harvest refuses to pay the extra. Doty stops delivering, and now Harvest is suing for breach.
And Doty throws up a whole wall of defenses. They're claiming there's no valid contract, or, if there is, it's voidable because of duress or mistake. And at the very least, they want that oral price adjustment admitted into evidence.
So that's our mission. We need to figure out if a valid contract even exists, and if it does, if any of Doty's defenses actually hold water. I mean, where do we even begin to unpack this?
We need a disciplined path, a framework. We can't just jump to the end. So first, we have to establish the choice of law. Why are we even using the UCC?
Okay.
Second, we analyze formation, specifically offer acceptance and consideration in these output contracts. Third, we dissect the defense's economic duress, mistake, and capacity.
End of the finale.
And finally, the boss battle, the parole evidence rule.
Okay, let's start with that first step then, this
Yep.
choice of law inquiry. Why does the Uniform Commercial Code apply here? Why not just common law?
Well, the general rule is pretty straightforward. The UCC Article 2 applies to transactions involving the sale of goods.
And goods or?
Goods are defined as, well, all things which are movable at the time of identification to the contract.
And kale is movable.
Kale is a vegetable. You can move it. It's a good. Therefore, the UCC controls this entire analysis, and that's critical because the UCC can be more flexible than the common law, but it also has very specific rules we have to follow.
Okay, that was the easy part. Now let's get into formation. When Mariana said, all the kale you'll need, and the contract later said entire output, that sounds awfully vague to me. Doesn't a promise need to be more specific? Is that actually valid consideration?
This is a classic trip-up point. The general rule for consideration requires a bargain for exchange of legal detriment or benefit. We often use the mnemonic from the source material, the BLD sandwich.
The BLV sandwich.
Yes, B for bargain for exchange, L for legal sufficiency, and D for determinable promises. If you have all those ingredients, you have consideration.
But isn't "I'll sell you all I make" a bit slippery? It feels like Doty could just decide to make zero kale and get out of it.
And that's where the specific sub-rule for UCC output contracts comes in. A promise to sell all of one's output or buy all of one's requirements is valid consideration. It's not illusory.
Wow.
Because the UCC implies a duty of good faith performance on both parties. You can't just stop producing to avoid the contract.
Yeah.
That good faith requirement, that provides the necessary mutuality of obligation.
I want to drill down on this because it's the foundation of the whole lawsuit. Let's analyze the formation in Doty v. Harvest. So first, what are the legally dispositive facts regarding the promises that were made?
The essential facts are that Doty promised to sell its entire output of organic kale to Harvest, and reciprocally, Harvest promised to buy that output.
Yeah.
This created a situation where Doty limited its freedom to sell to anyone else, and Harvest limited its freedom to buy from anyone else.
And what was the core legal issue there?
The issue is whether these mutual promises in an output contract actually constitute sufficient consideration to form a binding agreement.
So what rule of law applies? Can you state the black letter rule and, break it down into its testable elements for us?
The rule is that under the UCC, an output contract is enforceable if it's supported by mutuality of obligation. And this rule, it really breaks down into two key elements. First, there has to be a mutual restriction of freedom, which is the legal detriment.
And second.
Second, there must be a good faith obligation to operate the business and actually produce the goods.
Thank you. Now for the court's elemental analysis. Let's walk through this step by step. How did the facts apply to element 1, that legal detriment?
Well, Doty incurred a legal detriment because it restricted its sales only to Harvest. It gave up the right to sell its kale to the local grocery store or a competitor, anyone else.
And Harvest.
Harvest incurred a detriment by restricting its purchases only from Doty. That mutual restriction of freedom that satisfies the element of legal detriment.
Understood. Now, what about the second element, the good faith obligation?
The UCC reads this into the contract automatically. It assumes Mariana will try in good faith to grow kale, and Leonidas will try in good faith to sell it. Because this duty exists, Doty can't just arbitrarily decide to produce nothing because the price isn't great.
So that implied duty is what solidifies the deal.
It's at the glue.
Okay? And after analyzing all the elements, what was the court's final conclusion?
The conclusion was, yes, a valid contract was formed. The mutual good faith obligation and the mutual restrictions, they satisfy the requirement for enforceability.
So we have a contract. Doty is on the hook, but Mariana is trying to get out of it. She claims she was under extreme financial stress and, quote, felt she had no choice. Let's transition to Doty's defenses. Does this actually constitute economic duress?
It's a very, very high bar to clear. The general rule for economic duress requires 3 specific elements. 1, a wrongful or unlawful threat. 2, the lack of a reasonable alternative. And 3, actual inducement of the contract by that threat.
Let's do a quick analysis here. The policy note in the source material says, mere financial pressure isn't enough. Why is that?
Well, think about it. If we let everyone with financial stress void their contracts, commerce would just collapse, right?
Right.
Every business is under some kind of pressure. The pressure has to come from the other party acting wrongfully.
Okay, let's apply that to Doty v. Harvest regarding duress. First, what are the legally dispositive facts?
The facts are that Mariana was under financial stress, yes, but it was due to market forces. Harvest didn't threaten her. They didn't threaten to withhold payments or spread rumors or anything like that. They just negotiated a deal.
And so the core legal issue is?
The issue is whether general financial stress and, a feeling of no choice is enough to constitute economic duress to void a contract.
What rule of law applies? Could you state the full black letter rule and break it down again?
The rule is that economic duress exists only when one party's conduct meets 3 elements. First, a wrongful or unlawful threat. Second, the victim has a lack of a reasonable alternative. And third, the threat actually induced the assent.
Okay. Now for the elemental analysis. How did the facts apply to element 1, the wrongful threat?
This element fails completely, utterly. Harvest did nothing wrongful. There was no coercion, no blackmail, no tortious conduct. The stress Mariana felt came from the market, not from Leonidas. So without a wrongful act by the defendant, there's no duress.
Okay, what about element 2, the lack of a reasonable alternative?
That also fails. Doty could have refused to sign. She could have tried to negotiate different terms, maybe looked for a bridge loan or cut costs somewhere else. She had alternatives. She just didn't like them.
And the final conclusion on duress.
The defense of economic duress fails. There was no wrongful conduct that compelled her to agree.
Okay, so Doty strikes out on duress. She pivots. She argues, hey, this price hike was unexpected. We made a mistake. Does the defensive mistake save her?
Unlikely. The general rule for mutual mistake requires that the parties have an erroneous belief about a basic assumption of fact, and this is key, a fact existing at the time of contracting.
At the time seems to be the operative phrase there.
Precisely. Let's analyze it. The fact here is the cost of growing kale. At the time they signed, the cost was X. Later, the cost became Y. That's not a mistake about an existing fact. That is a future market fluctuation.
So if I buy a stock and it tanks, I can't just claim mistake to get my money back.
Exactly. That's called risk. In a fixed price contract, the seller assumes the risk that costs might rise, and the buyer assumes the risk that the market price might fall. Unless the contract has a price escalator clause, Doty is stuck with that risk.
Yeah.
The defense fails.
One last Hail Mary from Doty. She claims lack of capacity. She says the stress was so bad she wasn't thinking straight.
This is the weakest argument of all. Capacity usually refers to things like infancy, mental illness, or, severe intoxication.
Not just business pressure.
Yeah. Business pressure does not equal mental incapacity. Mariana understood the transaction. It was a commercial, arm's-length deal. She was a business owner making a business decision. This defense is a non-starter.
Okay, so the contract is formed, the defenses have crumbled. Now we arrive at the final boss battle, the parole evidence rule. This is where the rubber really meets the road.
This is the most technical and, for Doty, the most dangerous pull to the case.
So let's set the scene again. Mariana claims Leonidas said orally at their meeting the price might go up if costs rose.
Right.
But the written contract, the one they both actually signed, says $1.50 per pound and has that merger clause. This written agreement constitutes the entire agreement.
The conflict is stark, isn't it? You have a floating price oral promise versus a fixed price written promise.
Let's analyze the admissibility of this oral price term in Doty v. Harvest. First, strictly speaking, what are the legally dispositive facts regarding the writing itself?
The writing specifies a price of $1.50 per pound. And crucially, it contains a merger clause stating this written agreement constitutes the entire agreement. Mariana is trying to bring in prior oral testimony that directly contradicts this.
And what's the core legal issue?
The issue is whether the parole evidence rule bars the admission of evidence about a prior oral agreement to increase prices when the subsequent written contract is completely integrated and contains a fixed price.
What rule of law applies? Please state the black letter rule and break it down into its testable elements.
The rule is UCC Section 2202. It states that terms set forth in a writing, which are intended by the parties as a final expression of their agreement, may not be contradicted by evidence of any prior agreement or of a contemporaneous oral agreement.
And the test.
The test has two main stages. First, we determine if the writing is an integration. Second, we determine if the outside evidence contradicts the writing.
Thank you. Now for the court's elemental analysis. Let's walk through this step by step. How did the facts apply to the first element, integration?
Well, the court looks at the intent of the parties. And the presence of a merger clause is highly persuasive, almost conclusive, evidence that the parties intended the writing to be completely integrated.
Meaning it's the final and exclusive statement of the deal.
Exactly. Because Harvest and Doty signed a contract with this clause, the court deems the writing completely integrated. The wall is up.
Understood. Now, what about the second element, contradiction? Does the oral term contradict the writing?
Yes, and this is fatal for Doty's argument. The writing says $1.50. That's a fixed number. The oral statement says the price might go up. That's a variable number. You simply cannot have a price that is both fixed and variable at the same time. Therefore, the oral term directly contradicts the express terms of the writing.
But wait, what about an exception for, say, course of dealing or trade usage? Mariana said, that's how we've done it in the past.
That is a very nuanced point. The UCC does allow evidence of course of dealing to explain or supplement terms. However, and this is a big however, it cannot be used to contradict express terms.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If the writing says black, you might use trade usage to show that in this industry, black also includes dark gray. But you can't use trade usage to show that black means white. Here, $1.50 is explicit. You can't use past dealings to erase a specific number that's written in the contract.
So after analyzing all these elements, what is the final conclusion here?
The oral evidence is barred. It's inadmissible. The written price of $1.50 per pound stands, and Doty is in breach for refusing to deliver at that price.
To really make this stick for our listeners, I want to use a visceral hypothetical. Let's forget about kale. Let's imagine a pizza contract.
I love a good pizza analogy.
Okay, so let's say I order 1,000 pizzas from you. We sign a contract that says cheese pizzas only, no toppings, and it has a merger clause.
Got it.
But then I try to bring in a witness who says, but before we signed, the expert promised he would throw in anchovies if I asked.
That's a perfect parallel.
The smell of anchovies is the oral evidence.
And the written contract is the cheese-only clause. The anchovies directly contradict the no toppings rule. If we let the anchovies in, we destroy the integrity of the written menu.
I see.
The parole evidence rule is the airlock. It keeps the smell of the anchovies out of the courtroom. If the writing is final, the anchovies and the oral price hike, they stay out.
That really brings it home. If you write it down and you say, this is everything, you would better mean it.
Precisely. It protects the certainty of commerce. If parties could just talk their way out of written terms, contracts would become meaningless.
So we've dissected the body of this case. We've looked at the organs formation, defenses, evidence. Now I want you to stitch this all back together for our listeners who might be facing an exam or even a real-life contract dispute. Can you synthesize this module into a kind of diagnostic checklist?
Absolutely. Think of this as your emergency room checklist for contract analysis. Step 1 is check controlling law. Look at what's being sold. Is it a good? Is it kale? A car? A computer? If yes, you are in UCC territory, don't apply common law rules.
Okay, step 1. UCC or common law?
Step 2 is the formation check. You're looking for that BLD sandwich bargain for legal sufficiency determinable. But specifically, if you see an output or requirements contract, don't panic about vagueness. Check for good faith. If the parties are acting in good faith, the contract is valid.
Got it. Then defenses.
Right. Step 3 is the defense check. If a party is trying to escape the deal, look closely at their excuse. For duress, don't just look for stress. Look for a wrongful act by the other party. For mistake, look at the timeline. Was the mistake about a fact existing at the time? If it's just a future price change, that's not a mistake. That's a bad gamble.
And the final step.
And finally, step 4, the parole evidence check. Scan the document for a merger clause, something that says this is the entire agreement. If you see that and the other party tries to bring up a conversation that happened before the signing that contradicts what's written, like a fixed price versus a floating price, shut it down. The writing wins.
That is a powerful framework, element by element, step by step. It takes the mystery out of it.
It does. It turns a messy story into a solvable equation.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on as you leave this deep dive. We talked about how the written contract killed the oral promise because it had a fixed price. But what if the written contract had been silent on the price? What if it just said, Doty sells kale to Harvest, and didn't mention the $1.50 at all? Would the oral evidence get in then? Or would the UCC maybe fill in the gap with a reasonable price?
That is a dangerous but very interesting door to open. If it were silent, that oral evidence might just come in to supplement the writing, not contradict it.
Indeed. Think about that. You can apply this method to your next legal problem or even your next negotiation. Until next time, keep reading the fine print.